The Jewish people had a profound understanding of the concept of prophethood, in contrast to the Arabs, who were largely unfamiliar with it. This unfamiliarity is reflected in the Quran, where Allah articulates that Prophet Muhammad was dispatched to admonish a community that had not previously received a prophet, a nation largely unacquainted with the essence of prophetic guidance. Although the legacy of Prophet Abraham existed among them, it was nearly forgotten, and they had little comprehension of what it meant to be a prophet. Consequently, when the Arabs learned that Prophet Muhammad claimed to be a messenger of God, their only point of reference for prophethood came from the Jewish and Christian communities, known as the people of the book. In their skepticism, the Quraysh sent emissaries to consult the Jewish communities, seeking their expertise. They needed to devise a line of questioning that could potentially reveal what they assumed were false claims made by Prophet Muhammad. These delegations traveled to Yathrib, which was later known as Medina, where Jewish populations resided. They sought questions that would be challenging for Prophet Muhammad to answer. The Jewish scholars proposed asking about the stories and lineage of Isaac, Jacob, Yaakov, and Joseph Yusuf, figures central to Jewish heritage, whose narratives were obscure to the Arabs. The Quraysh then presented these questions to Prophet Muhammad, confident that he would struggle to provide accurate responses. However, in response to this challenge, Allah revealed the entire Surah Yusuf, a chapter of the Quran that meticulously recounts the life of Prophet Joseph. This narrative was unknown to Prophet Muhammad before the revelation, as emphasized by the Quranic verse stating that the Prophet was not present when Joseph's brothers conspired against him. This incident serves to illustrate that the knowledge bestowed upon Prophet Muhammad was divinely inspired, transcending the limited understanding of the Arab people, who were unfamiliar with the stories of Prophet Jacob and his descendants. Another noteworthy event took place during the early Meccan period, when the Quraysh, once again seeking to test Prophet Muhammad, asked the Jewish scholars for additional questions that only a true prophet could answer. The Jewish scholars provided 3 questions, each deeply rooted in the traditions of the prophets of Israel, traditions that were entirely foreign to the Arabs. The questions posed were: the narrative of the young men who sought refuge in a cave and fell into a deep, prolonged sleep, a story known only through prophetic tradition. The account of a man who traveled across the world from the east to the west and experienced extraordinary events, a tale surrounded by myth and legend. The nature and origin of the soul, Ra, a profound mystery that only divine insight could unravel. Prophet Muhammad, confident in his ability to answer, assured the Quraysh that he would provide the necessary responses the following day. However, due to his omission of the phrase, Inshallah, God willing, the revelation was delayed by 2 weeks. During this period, the Quraysh mocked him, questioning whether his connection with the divine had been severed. Eventually, Allah revealed Surah al-Hikmah, which comprehensively addressed all 3 questions. This delay in revelation highlighted a critical theological lesson. Despite Prophet Muhammad's exalted status, he remained a servant of Allah, entirely subject to divine will. In the Quran, Allah frequently refers to Prophet Muhammad as Abdullah, the servant of Allah, a title that conveys the highest honor rather than any form of denigration. It signifies that Prophet Muhammad was Allah's chosen servant and the epitome of worship. The delay served as a reminder that even Prophet Muhammad, like all of creation, is bound by the divine decree and must maintain the humility of invoking God's will in all matters. Thus, Surah al-Kahf stands as a testament to the authenticity of Prophet Muhammad's prophethood, providing answers to questions that were intended to undermine his credibility. Moreover, the surah offered details that were previously unknown, even to the Jewish scholars, further affirming the divine origin of Prophet Muhammad's message. Similarly, Prophet Muhammad was asked about a man who journeyed extensively across the world, from the easternmost to the westernmost regions, whose identity was a mystery. In response to this inquiry, Allah revealed that this individual was Dhul-Qarnayn. It is important to clarify that some mistakenly identified Dhul-Qarnayn with Alexander the Great. However, such an association is not only unfounded but also contradicts historical evidence. Alexander the Great, known for his conquests, was a devout pagan, and his philosophical mentor, Aristotle, was an ardent believer in the deities of Greek mythology. Therefore, it is clear that Dhul-Qarnayn cannot be equated with Alexander. The precise identity of Dhul-Qarnayn remains uncertain, as he is absent from Western historical records, but he appears to have been a significant traveler of his time. Whether Dhul-Qarnayn was a prophet or simply a king is a matter of scholarly debate, and ultimately, only Allah knows the truth. When questioned about the nature of the soul, Prophet Muhammad was guided by Allah to respond with the verse, "They ask you about the spirit. Say, the spirit is from the command of my Lord, and you have been given only a little knowledge." This response emphasizes the profound mystery surrounding the soul, a divine secret that lies beyond the grasp of human understanding. The Jewish scholars who posed this question intended it as a challenge, knowing that detailed knowledge of the soul is not accessible to humans. Had Prophet Muhammad provided a detailed description, it would have contradicted their expectations and potentially undermined his prophetic claim. Instead, his response appropriately reflected the limited knowledge that humans possess, as ordained by Allah. This incident affirms a critical theological point. Certain dimensions of divine knowledge are inherently beyond human comprehension, including the essence of the soul. Despite the advancements of modern science, the nature of the soul continues to elude full understanding, remaining one of the great mysteries of existence. Interestingly, all cultures and civilizations, regardless of time or place, share certain core beliefs, such as religiosity, the existence of the human soul, and the presence of malevolent spirits. The question about the soul posed by the Jewish scholars was intended to trap Prophet Muhammad, as they expected that he would be unable to provide a detailed answer. However, his response, grounded in divine wisdom, affirmed his authenticity as a prophet. The first two questions were answered with extensive detail in Surah Al-Kahf, while the third question, concerning the soul, was met with an acknowledgement of the limitations of human knowledge. This incident represents another instance in which the efforts to discredit the prophet were unsuccessful. The ninth strategy employed by the opponents of Prophet Muhammad was the use of direct physical torture. As repeatedly noted, pre-Islamic Arab society was deeply entrenched in tribalism, where an individual's protection and security were determined by their tribal affiliations, rather than by any legal or governmental authority. Consequently, a person's safety was largely dependent on the strength and influence of their tribe. In pre-Islamic Arabia, individuals with strong tribal affiliations, such as Prophet Muhammad and Abu Bakr, experienced a degree of protection despite the significant adversities they faced. The prestigious status of the Quraysh tribe provided a measure of security, though it was not absolute. Many of the earliest Muslim converts were enslaved individuals or mawali, freed slaves with client relationships to their former masters. In Islamic literature, the term mawla refers to a freed slave who, despite gaining freedom, remained under the obligation of a client relationship similar to indentured servitude. Although such individuals enjoyed more liberty than those who remained enslaved, they continued to owe allegiance to their former masters. Early Muslim slaves and mawali faced extreme forms of torture. For instance, when Ibn Abbas was inquired about the extent of the suffering endured by early Muslims, he described it as severe. These believers were subjected to intense deprivation of food and water, causing them to become almost semi-conscious on the ground. They were coerced into uttering false declarations of deities as their gods merely to alleviate their suffering. Ibn Abbas noted that the torture was so intense that if an insect had passed by and they were asked if it were their god, they would have affirmed it just to escape the torment. Islam, however, provides a concession for such extreme circumstances, allowing individuals to say whatever is necessary to avoid death, while their faith remains intact in their hearts. The primary instigator of this persecution was Abu Jahl, who employed various tactics based on the victim's social status. For Quraysh noblemen who converted to Islam, Abu Jahl resorted to verbal abuse and mockery without physical harm to avoid repercussions from their tribes. For Muslims engaged in commerce, he enforced a boycott, halting their trade in Mecca. In contrast, for slaves and mawali, Abu Jahl personally inflicted or ordered severe physical torture, participating directly in the abuse. Prophet Muhammad referred to Abu Jahl as the Pharaoh of my ummah, indicating his extreme malevolence, even surpassing that of Abu Lahab. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's narration provides insight into the early Muslim martyrs. He listed himself, Abu Bakr, Umar, Sumayya, the first martyr in Islam, Sahib, Bilal, and al-Miqdad among those who suffered persecution. While Prophet Muhammad was shielded by his uncle Abu Talib, other early Muslims faced grave threats. Ibn Mas'ud observed that many of these early believers eventually acquiesced to Quraysh's demands under torture, except for Bilal ibn Rabah. Bilal, a freed slave of Abyssinian origin, regarded his soul as insignificant compared to Allah and steadfastly refused to recant his faith. His firm resolve led to unparalleled cruelty. He was subjected to harsh treatment by Meccan street gangs, who dragged him through the streets with a rope around his neck while he continued to proclaim, Ahad, Ahad, God is one. Bilal's owner, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who was among the most notorious Quraysh leaders, personally participated in Bilal's torture. This illustrates the complex dynamics of slavery, where slaves were valuable assets, often more valuable than camels or houses. Therefore, while slave owners sought to punish their slaves, they also risked undermining their own economic interests by damaging such valuable property. Such treatment underscores the extreme nature of the hostility faced by slaves, revealing the profound levels of hatred harbored by their oppressors. The destruction of such invaluable property, human lives, reflects a deep-seated moral corruption. In contrast, the cost of an animal was significantly lower, indicate the severe cruelty inflicted upon slaves. Historical records vividly document this cruelty. For example, certain historical figures are known to have personally enforced harsh punishments by placing heavy stones on the chests of slaves, leaving them immobilized and exposed to the harsh desert sun without sustenance. Hassan ibn Thabit, a pre-Islamic poet from Medina, provides an account of witnessing the severe torture inflicted upon Bilal during Hajj. He expressed astonishment at Bilal's endurance despite the intense pain caused by the scorching rocks. Hassan's narrative emphasizes that the rocks were so intensely heated that raw meat placed upon them would have cooked, magnifying Bilal's remarkable fortitude as he repeatedly declared his faith in the face of extreme suffering. Decades later, a narration from the nephew of Aisha recounts Bilal's steadfast resolve despite severe torture. Unlike others who had succumbed and compromised, Bilal remained firm, epitomizing the principle which signifies that the nature of one's reward or punishment mirrors their actions. Bilal's resilience was ultimately rewarded with a position of profound honor. As the first official mu'adhin appointed by the Prophet Muhammad, Bilal's voice, once subdued by persecution, was elevated to proclaim the call to prayer from the top of the Kaaba. This transition from suffering to honor reflects divine justice, reinforcing the concept that enduring trials often leads to significant rewards. Reflecting on this, one can appreciate the significance of Bilal ibn Rabah's role. The Prophet Muhammad stated that whoever hears the azan will testify on behalf of the mu'adhin. Bilal's continuous recitation of the azan for over a decade in Medina and later in Mecca means that countless witnesses attest to his faithfulness. This affirms the considerable reward for the mu'adhin, and Bilal's contribution is highlighted in various hadiths, including those recorded in Bukhari. The concept of having long necks on the Day of Judgment signifies a position of great honor rather than a literal physical attribute. In classical Arabic symbolism, a long neck denotes respect and distinction. Bilal ibn Rabah's role as the official mu'adhin is significant. Among the early converts to Islam, he endured exceptional hardship due to his Abyssinian heritage, which placed him at a disadvantage in a society that favored Arab slaves. His extreme suffering exemplifies the brutal treatment he faced, driven by racial prejudice. This historical context reveals the barbarity inflicted upon Bilal and illustrates how societies dehumanize certain groups to justify cruelty. In Bilal's case, the dehumanization and subsequent torture highlight the pervasive racism and caste systems prevalent in pre-Islamic Arabia. Islam's emergence challenged and dismantled these unjust hierarchies, promoting equality and respect across all societal strata. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the system of slavery was deeply stratified, with distinctions often made based on ethnicity. Arab slaves were categorized differently from non-Arabs, and there was no concept of a slave being from an equal social class. As such, Arabs were sometimes enslaved, but those of non-Arab descent, such as Abyssinians, faced harsher conditions. Bilal ibn Rabah, an Abyssinian slave, exemplifies this distinction. Another individual, Khabbab ibn al-Arith, also endured severe suffering during the early days of Islam. The persecution they faced serves as a stark reminder of the sacrifices made by the first Muslims. The lack of regard shown towards Ka'ab stemmed from his status as neither Arab nor of distinguished lineage, which underscores why Islam emerged to dismantle caste systems based on ancestry and skin color. Arab slaves existed as well, disproving the notion that only those from inferior classes could be enslaved. Ka'ab, a skilled swordsmith from an Arab tribe in Yemen, was one such slave. His owner, a woman named Lamar, purchased him because of his craft. Ka'ab, one of the earliest converts to Islam, faced severe persecution once his conversion was discovered. Unable to confront him physically herself, Lamar incited others to beat him. Ka'ab later recounted that upon returning to his workplace, a group of Quraysh surrounded him, mocking and questioning him until he confessed his faith. Following his confession, they brutally assaulted him, leaving him unconscious, bloody, and bruised. The brutality extended beyond mere beatings. Lamar would often take hot iron, freshly heated in his forge, and use it to burn his back as a form of torture. The Prophet Muhammad once passed by and witnessed Ka'ab's torment, inflicted through burning with hot iron. Recognizing the severity of the torture, the Prophet raised his hands in supplication, beseeching Allah to assist the oppressed slave against his tormentor. Shortly thereafter, in a turn of fate, Lamar was struck by a mysterious illness, causing her to behave like a rabid animal. Despite the best efforts of the local doctors, who resorted to cauterization, a painful procedure involving the burning of the skin, she succumbed to her condition. This tragic end served as a form of divine retribution in this life, though her ultimate fate in the hereafter remains known only to Allah. This narrative exemplifies the Quranic principle of, as you do, so shall it be done unto you. The severity of Ka'ab's suffering was such that it was he who approached the Prophet during a gathering under the shade of the Kaaba, imploring him to seek divine intervention against the ongoing persecution. His plea, "For how long shall we endure this torment?" encapsulates the desperation felt by the early Muslims under relentless oppression. The Prophet, rising from his position, responded with words that would resonate through the annals of history, marking a crucial moment in the struggle for justice. Ka'ab's master and mistress eventually passed away, yet Ka'ab actively participated in all of the Prophet Muhammad's expeditions and lived until the 17th year of the Hijrah. A noteworthy divergence in policy between the caliphs Abu Bakr and Umar ibn al-Khattab is highlighted in this context. Abu Bakr implemented a uniform stipend policy for all companions, stating that Allah alone knows who possesses true piety, thus ensuring equitable treatment. Conversely, Umar ibn al-Khattab adopted a different approach, differentiating salaries based on the chronological acceptance of Islam. Early converts received higher stipends, while later converts received lower pay. Ironically, Ka'ab, who was among the earliest converts, found himself classified within the mid-tier of this scale. This classification reflects the impartiality of Umar's policy, rather than an attempt to favor him. Despite this, he was among the top 10 companions and received one of the highest salaries. Residing in Kufa, Ka'ab built a modest home and established a philanthropic initiative, a treasury accessible to those in financial need, with no questions asked. This act of generosity underscores his commitment to aiding the less fortunate. On his deathbed, Ka'ab displayed profound humility and reflection. He wept not from physical pain or fear of the afterlife but from concern over his material comforts. He lamented that while he had enjoyed worldly benefits, his companions had endured suffering without such luxuries. His fear was that his enjoyment of earthly pleasures might diminish his share in the hereafter. Ka'ab's poignant reflections were compounded by the contrast between his own luxurious funeral arrangements and those of his fellow companions, such as Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, who had received scant burial provisions. His story illustrates a deep sense of spiritual awareness and apprehension about divine justice. This narrative, along with the accounts of early converts like Ka'ab, enriches our understanding of the early Islamic period and the profound sacrifices made by its first adherents. It is a compelling example of faith, humility, and the pursuit of spiritual integrity. The sacrifices of the early Muslims, particularly those of Yasin and his family, stand as poignant examples of devotion and suffering. Among the most harrowing narratives is that of Yasin, his wife Sumayya, and their two sons, Abdullah and Amr. This family endured unimaginable torment, experiencing the cruelty of torture together. Yasin and Sumaya, alongside their children, faced relentless persecution in front of one another, a situation that magnified their suffering. While individual torture is deeply distressing, witnessing one's own family subjected to such horrors is an unparalleled nightmare. This grim reality illustrates the extremity of their trials. The family belonged to a slave class within the Arab society, specifically the Banu Bakr tribe, and all four were enslaved. Despite the variations in accounts regarding their deaths, it is confirmed that Yasin and Sumaya were among the first martyrs of Islam. Their suffering was unparalleled in Mecca, a fact that is reflected in the Prophet Muhammad's well-known and touching words of comfort. The Prophet Muhammad, as he witnessing their torture, encouraged them to remain patient, assuring them that their ultimate reward was paradise. His empathy for their plight was profound, as he was powerless to intervene directly. The details of Yasin's death vary, with some accounts suggesting he was dragged through the streets by rope, while others describe a more gruesome end involving horses. Sumaya's death was equally brutal. Abu Jahl, a notorious antagonist, subjected her to a heinous and barbaric execution, thrusting a spear in a most vicious manner, witnessed by her children. Following these tragic events, their surviving son, Ammar, faced immense trauma. At approximately 15 years old, Ammar, having witnessed the brutal deaths of his family members, succumbed to the pressures of torture. In his desperation, he expressed remorse for uttering statements that could be perceived as disbelief. When Ammar sought the Prophet Muhammad for solace, he was reassured that if his faith remained intact despite the coercion, he would not be judged harshly. The Prophet Muhammad advised him to remain steadfast if the situation recurred. This narrative led to the revelation of Surah An-Nahl, which provides reassurance that utterances made under duress would be forgiven, highlighting the compassionate nature of divine justice. Ammar ibn Yasin's story, marked by enduring faith amidst extreme adversity, remains a testament to the resilience and devotion of the early Sahaba. Numerous authentic hadiths document the life and contributions of Ammar ibn Yasir, found in collections such as Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Ammar lived a full life, reaching old age and witnessing significant events such as the Fitna, civil war, during the caliphate of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Prophet Muhammad once remarked that Ammar's faith was so profound it filled not only his heart but extended to his neck. Ammar was affectionately referred to as son of Sumaya, a tribute to his mother, Sumaya, who was martyred. The Prophet Muhammad praised Ammar, stating that he consistently chose the more righteous path when faced with difficult decisions. This commendation is reflected in a notable hadith, where the Prophet prophesied that Ammar would be martyred by a rebel faction. This prediction came to pass during the Battle of Siffin, where Ammar was killed by an arrow from the forces of Muawiyah. The hadith served as a significant point of reference in validating the righteousness of Ali's cause. The friendships among early Muslims, including Ammar, Suhaib al-Rumi and Bilal, are well documented and celebrated. These three companions were close friends, sharing strong bonds in their youth, typically in their 20s and 30s. Their collective experiences and trials indicate their solidarity and dedication to Islam. Suhaib al-Rumi, another significant figure, is renowned for his unique story. Originally a slave in Not Rome, Suhaib had retained his Arabic heritage and eventually escaped. He sold himself into slavery in Mecca to maintain his freedom and was subsequently owned by Abdullah ibn Judayan, known for his comparatively merciful treatment of slaves. Suhaib's trials were less severe than those of many others, reflecting the varying degrees of hardship faced by early Muslims. Despite the severe treatment he endured, Suhaib was fortunate that his master, Abdullah ibn Judayan, ultimately treated him with relative kindness. Recognizing Suhaib's intelligence and literacy, Ibn Judayan appointed him as a business manager. Suhaib's acumen in managing business affairs led him to considerable prosperity. Following his death, Ibn Judayan had bequeathed Suhaib his freedom, ensuring that he would be liberated from servitude. When Suhaib decided to migrate to Medina, the Quraysh, upon learning of his departure, intercepted him at the outskirts of Mecca. Confronted by the Quraysh, Suhaib demonstrated his formidable prowess with a bow and arrow, declaring that he would not be touched until every arrow in his quiver had found its mark, and he promised that none would lay hands on him until his sword had been bent and broken. Despite his defiant stance, the Quraysh, valuing their lives, opted not to engage him directly. Instead, they besieged him with threats until they demanded that he return his wealth before permitting his departure. This situation reflects a broader historical pattern of resentment towards immigrants who are perceived to gain more than they initially had, a sentiment that echoes across different eras. Sahib, recognizing no alternative, agreed to their demands. He surrendered his camel and the wealth he had accumulated, and disclosed the location of his buried assets. As a result, he became the only companion known to have performed the hijrah migration on foot, traversing the desert with nothing but the clothes on his back. His journey was so arduous that he arrived at Quba, just outside of Medina, in a state of extreme exhaustion and emaciation. After meeting the Prophet Muhammad, Sahib was greeted with compassion. The Prophet personally attended to his needs, providing him with food and water, and expressed admiration for his sacrifice, saying, "O Sahib, your transaction has been most successful." This commendation was later corroborated by the revelation of a verse in the Quran, Surah al-Baqarah, which praises those who relinquish all they have for the sake of Allah's rewards. There are those who sell themselves and their wealth for the sake of Allah. Sahib's story exemplifies the trials faced by early Muslims and reinforced the profound sacrifices made for their faith.